And welcome to the next episode of the Housekeepers Podcast. I'm Allie.
I'm Ivy.
And Ivy is still working on her video, but we did realize that there was an audio issue last time, so I have this huge ass 90s microphone in my face now. And I think we fixed it. We're still having some audio issues. So bear with us as we figure out all the tech. But hopefully it will be more balanced this time. Ivy isn't actually that loud, believe it or not. Oh, Ivy, you had an announcement to tell everyone today.
Uh, I did?
Yeah. Your work?
Oh, yeah. I was actually going to
Yeah.
announce that. Thank you for reminding me.
You're welcome.
Last week, I got promoted to assistant head housekeeper. So, I
Yay! I'm so happy for you.
I'm excited. Um, Speaking of housekeeping and just all of that in general,
Yes.
um, Allie recommended doing like a key tip of the day with having to do like cleaning or housekeeping in general or being safe on the streets or things like that. Just
And we're
some
both
random
witches, so maybe we can do like a witchy tip or something.
Yeah. My key tip or more like little side note, and this might come off as crass, but if you have the ability, please do tip your housekeepers.
Oh my god, yes. Especially if you have crotch gremlins, okay? If you come in with your crotch gremlins and you let them put crumbs all over the floor and then leave me 2 cents to pick up after your little gremlins, I'm not gonna be happy. So, I'm just saying.
It really does help us out. Like, there's been a lot of times where I've paid a bill or gotten groceries on tips I've saved up over the weeks. So,
But some days I'll go home with 75 bucks in my pocket and it really makes my day and makes everything I did worth it in that day. So
mhm.
it really does. Even if you leave like $2 or $3, it doesn't have to be a lot. It's just like,
Mm,
you appreciate us.
it really just does help, and it does make us feel like we're more than just, I don't know, not servants. That's not the word I want to use, but it really just does help
No, that's
us
how it feels
kind of.
sometimes. Really, it does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had some rooms. Huh.
Well, just on Labor Day, I had a room that it was a queen, and for us, we have 2 beds and a queen, so we always know there's families in there, and there was crumbs literally everywhere. It took me 5 minutes to vacuum because there was so many freaking crumbs, and they didn't leave me a cent for a tip. It was, and we only get 30 minutes per room. I know you guys get
Mhm.
less, but we only get 30 minutes per room in our rooms. So it was quite a disaster. So the case that we're doing today is one of my, actually, probably my favorite case. If I had to pick a favorite one, it probably would be this or another Munchausen by proxy um, case. There's not many out there. So today we are talking about Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Dee Dee Blanchard. Do you know anything about this case at all, Ivy?
Uh, I did a little bit of research on it way back right after the TV show aired because everybody was talking about it. I avoided the TV show like the plague.
The
Like
recent
I
one
would
on
just
Hulu or Mommy Dead and Dearest?
um I don't honestly know. I just know it was more of a like a it was less of a documentary and more like a drama type TV show.
Yeah, so that was The Act. That was on Hulu. I think a couple years ago it came out.
So that one I avoided it like the plague, and I did a little bit of research trying to figure out who she was, but I never really got into the case personally.
Yeah. So I do want to put a disclaimer before we start this. There is a lot of medical abuse in this case. If that is triggering for you, please, join us on the next one. But this whole case is essentially all medical abuse, and there is some physical and psychological abuse as well. So if any of that is triggering for you, please do not feel bad. You can always just leave us a like and then come back next time. We don't want anyone to be triggered because of what we're talking about. So we love you. Protect yourself. So I'm going to start off this episode by explaining what Munchausen by proxy is. It is no longer called Munchausen by proxy in the DSM. It is now called fictitious disorder, put upon another. So Munchausen syndrome was originally named after a German cavalry officer, Baron von Munchausen, who lived between the years of 1720 to 1797. He traveled widely throughout Germany and was very well known for his untruthful and dramatic stories. And he actually would self-abuse and fabricate stories to get pity and money from others. So Munchausen syndrome is putting ill on yourself or making yourself sick or pretending to be sick to get money. So Munchausen syndrome by proxy is putting it on someone else. But the by proxy and, the long name Munchausen tended to confuse people. So in recent years, as more light has been brought to this disorder, it is now just called either fictitious disorder, which I will also say is a lot different than hypochondriasis or hypochondriac. I personally am a hypochondriac. I would never make myself sick. I just always think I'm sick. So it is different. So fictitious disorder is purposefully making yourself sick or pretending to be sick. And then fictitious disorder put on another, which is how it's said now, is making another sick. Usually it is a caregiver to either a child or an old person that they are in the care of. And we see both with Dee Dee Blanchard, actually. So let's learn a little bit about Dee Dee before we get into what she ended up doing to her daughter, Gypsy Rose. Dee Dee was born in Chack Bay, Louisiana on May 3rd, 1967 to her mother, Emma Louise Gisclair, and her father, Claude Anthony Petrie Sr., which her birthday makes her a Tauros. She is
no.
I know. She was one of seven siblings and was named after her father, just like two of her other siblings. The other two that were named after their father were Claude Jr. and Claudia, with Dee Dee's real name being Claudine. Her other siblings were Tate, Todd, Dorla, and Evans Petrie. First of all, those names. Those names! I would change my name to Dee Dee too if my name was Claudine. I'm just gonna say that.
Can we also talk about the fact that you had such a high opinion of yourself? You named 3 of your children after you?
I know!
I'd understand one. I'd understand a junior keeping the name
Claude
of the family,
Jr.
whatever.
I understand that one, but 2 girls?
I would, not explaining what she did in the slightest, but I'd understand having a little bit of,
Of trauma!
Of issues, please notice me because I don't want to be under my father's shadow this
Seriously.
entire...
So I actually could not find a lot about Dee Dee's childhood, but growing up, she was a very troubling and trying child, according to both of her parents. Her siblings recalled that if anything didn't go her way, then she would steal money from her parents and her grandparents as, quote, payment for her not getting her own way. Her mother would call out this bad behavior, but it wasn't until later in life that her grandmother had had enough and forbade her from going into her house anymore. Dee Dee was also known to write bad checks when she owed people money and blamed it on the banks, saying that the banks told her that she was being scammed by the person asking her for money and shut down the check. It is speculated that she legally changed her name to Dee Dee after a while because her birth name has a bunch of petty crimes and bank fraud and credit card fraud linked to it, meaning it would be much harder for her to scam under that name anymore. Her parents divorced, and her father remarried eventually, and Dee Dee's stepmom claims that she was poisoned by Dee Dee by her putting Roundup, rat poison, in her food. She ended up in the hospital and survived, but this shows that even early in life, Dee Dee had an affinity for poisoning those close to her. Eventually, Dee Dee became a nurse's aide, and became well versed in medications that were given to patients as well as medical terminology.
Did she not only become this fictitious disorder, but did she also become an angel of death?
No. Thank God she didn't have control over the patient's medications, like giving them to them. She was a nurse's aide, so she essentially did the grunt work. Like pee pans, helping them go to the bathroom. She didn't actually administer any medication, thank God. Didn't hurt anyone that was not in her family.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah. So later in life, she took care of her mother when she became gravely ill in 1996 to 1997 when her mother passed away. The family suspects that Dee Dee starved her mother to death while she was taking care of her and even made her sick by giving her medications that she did not need. But how about those checks, though? I don't think you could get away with that in today's society. Blaming a canceled check or a bounce check on your bank, I don't think that would fly.
Um, it depends how, like, because I know I've had a check bounce because it claimed the check as fraudulent, and I had to go in and
I guess I've never had that happen. I've had like credit card and debit card charges be flagged, and I'm like, no, yeah, that was me because I bought something from like China for a cosplay or something. But I've never had it. I haven't written many checks though, so maybe that's why.
if I remember correctly, the check had something to do with a like mom and pop business.
Mm-hmm.
It was a smaller business. It wasn't like a main chain or anything. So, I believe it was put into somebody's like personal account that they didn't like recognize around the area, and so they
Oh,
flagged it.
that makes a little
I
more
had to call
sense.
them
Yeah.
and let them know that yeah, no, this was supposed to be.
Yeah. So that's about all I could find about her early years, but Dee Dee started dating Rob Blanchard at 24 years of age, and then she fell pregnant with his child. Rob was only 17 at the time when they got married. When they found out it was a girl, Dee Dee decided to name the baby Gypsy because she thought the name was pretty, and Rob was also a huge fan of Guns N' Roses. However, shortly before Gypsy was born in 1991, Rob left and divorced Dee Dee because he stated, quote, he got married for the wrong reasons. And no convincing would work from Dee Dee to make him come back. So after Gypsy was born, she went back to live with her family to raise Gypsy.
You said he was 17 when she got pregnant?
When they got married, and they got married while
Okay.
she was pregnant, and she was 24.
Is so he got married when they were or when she was pregnant at 17. So there's a very good chance that he got her pregnant when he was 16. Isn't that
That's possible.
technically rape?
I mean, this was 1990, like exactly 1990. So, because she was born in 1991, so it was either 1990 or 1991. I don't know if they were as stringent back then, especially because, let's see, what state was this again? Louisiana? They got some weird laws over in Louisiana.
Uh,
So I'm not sure. I know at
I'm
16 and 17 you can get married with parental consent in most states.
and it probably was considered a shotgun wedding considering the fact he got her pregnant, but
Yeah.
maybe it's also because the fact he was a male. I mean, I know they are less,
Well, and
um,
back then it was like a privilege for a boy that young to, do it with an older woman.
yeah.
They didn't really see it as like grooming or abuse or anything like that.
God, what a weird thought process.
What?
No, like that you can think that that wasn't grooming or
Well, they probably didn't even know what the word grooming was in the 90s. Let's be real.
that yeah, that's also a fair point.
Because, I mean,
Uh,
grooming didn't really come out until the internet age.
Yeah, no, you got a point.
Yeah.
Ugh, that just leaves a weird feeling.
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I was writing that. I was like, oh my god. So, Rob stayed in the baby's life as much as Dee Dee would allow him, but he recalled that Dee Dee was obsessed about the baby's health. Gypsy was born very slightly premature, which caused her skull to be slightly soft. But besides that, she was fine. Dee Dee's mother, however, chastised her on her parenting and told her she was doing everything wrong. She quickly became convinced that something was wrong with Gypsy when she wasn't growing well after coming home from the hospital. The doctors told Dee Dee that Gypsy had what is called failure to thrive, but that most infants grow out of it as they start getting enough nutrients and getting older. Gypsy did indeed grow out of this state, but then Dee Dee was convinced when she was 3 months old that she had sleep apnea. Several family members remember that Dee Dee would rush Gypsy to the hospital and demand overnight stays on monitors that kept track of her breathing and to run every test there was for sleep apnea, but none ever came back positive. At around age 6 to 7, she started telling people that Gypsy had a chromosomal disorder that caused Gypsy to have a plethora of different medical conditions, including muscular dystrophy. Do you know what muscular dystrophy is?
I'm not well versed in any medical terms.
So, muscular dystrophy is essentially a congenital disorder. Um, oh, God. It's the muscles don't develop correctly, and a lot of times those children need walkers or they can't walk. It's just the muscles dystrophy, which essentially means just like deteriorate. They just don't develop their muscles the way that they're supposed to. So a lot of times they can be immunocompromised too. There's a lot of things that go in with muscular dystrophy, but this was the big excuse that she gave for why Gypsy couldn't walk. So she started making Gypsy walk with a walker, and then shortly after this, around the age of 7 to 8, she got into a very minor motorcycle accident with her grandfather, and Dee Dee demanded she be put in a wheelchair. Gypsy only had a few abrasions on her knee and a few scratches, but Dee Dee swore that she would have to have several surgeries to fix her new issues from this accident. Rob knew about the alleged chromosomal disorder, and at the time praised Dee Dee for her devoted care to their daughter.
I'm flabbergasted.
Yeah. the her being a nurse's aide for a little bit and learning all of this medical terminology and what she could say her daughter had to get her like put in certain positions or have certain things done to her is just insane. It's amazing what a little medical knowledge can do to somebody. It's just crazy.
It's also just concerning if um even if Rob thought it was alleged, how he could or what made
Thought it
him
was
think it would
true.
be, yeah, or like, and praising her. And I don't know if he's alive, which he might not be. I
No,
don't know.
he is. He's still alive.
How I feel like you would feel extremely guilty if you praised her to only come out to find that none of it was true and your daughter dealt with years of abuse because of it.
I believe later on I say what he says to that when he found out everything that happened, but he was shocked to say the least. And he couldn't believe that this was going on. Especially after you find out what Dee Dee was saying about him to Gypsy and why Gypsy never reached out. It's crazy. For the rest of Gypsy's life, her mother would not allow her to walk. She would tell Gypsy that she was too ill to walk on her own and that she was required to stay in a wheelchair even if she thought she could walk on her own. Because of this, Gypsy was often invited to the Special Olympics with her mom and grandparents. In 2001, she was named the honorary queen of the Cree of Mid-City Parade, a child-oriented parade held during Mardi Gras in New Orleans. Dee Dee at the time claimed that Gypsy was 8, when in reality she was actually 10. And this is where she starts lying about her age and claiming that the birth certificates that were the originals are wrong.
Oh boy. This just gets worse and worse and
Oh,
oh dear.
we haven't even reached the tip of the iceberg yet, Ivy.
I know that's the concerning thing. How okay. That's another thing I want to know how she got away with because how would your I feel like your grandparents would or the grandparents would step in when they'd hear this and go, "No, she's actually
Well, no, the she would never say it to the grandparents or around the grandparents. She would just forge it on documents like later in life when I don't want to spoil anything, but she never said it to the family members. I think they were all aware of Gypsy's age, but she would make excuses. Like, if they would hear her say it, they'd say, oh, well, Gypsy thinks she's this age, so don't tell her she's not. Like, those kinds of things. Dee Dee started homeschooling Gypsy because of her health issues at around second grade, which I'm just going to say, for everyone listening here, if you notice that something fishy is going on with a child and then the parents suddenly pull them out of public school, that is a huge red flag. In every single child abuse case I've ever seen, they always homeschool them. And usually they're not even really schooling them if they are abusing them. They're just saying they are, just so that people don't see the abuse that's going on. But she claimed that Gypsy was too sick now to go to public school. Her mother did very little schooling, however, but Gypsy would say later in life that she learned to read from the Harry Potter books. Dee Dee's family started to question whether or not she needed to be in a wheelchair, and when she was concerned about it, she moved into her mother's house with her stepmother. So that was worded a little funny, but her mother, like Dee Dee's mother, started questioning a lot of the medical decisions that Dee Dee was making for Gypsy. So when Dee Dee's mother started asking questions, she moved into her father's house with her stepmother. And at this time, she started telling people that Gypsy was slow and not mentally, quote, all there. So mentally deficient. She also convinced doctors to put tubes in her ears for ear infections and have her salivary glands removed because of excess drooling from her mental delay. Gypsy was old enough at this point to talk to doctors herself, but Dee Dee would always tell her not to give any information and to just look at her mom if questions were asked to her. If she did try to say something, Dee Dee would interrupt her and tell the doctors she didn't know her own conditions well enough to tell them. The last thing that Dee Dee did at this point in Gypsy's life was convince doctors that she could not eat food well enough to get nutrients. So she had a feeding tube put in. After the feeding tube was put in, she told her family that Gypsy suffered from leukemia and shaved off all of Gypsy's hair. Then the accusations of poisoning her stepmother arose, and Gypsy and Dee Dee moved again, this time outside of New Orleans to a town called Slidell.
a feeding tube?
A feeding tube. Yep.
How?
And the girl was perfectly capable of eating on her own.
So feeding tubes are painful.
Yep. She had to go undergo surgery to get that done because it goes directly into the stomach. That's what you're hung up on, not her shaving off Gypsy's hair.
I'm more concerned about the painful feeding tube. Yes, shaving off your hair is very humiliating, and I like lying about leukemia. Oh God, that pisses me off to no extent.
And you know what? Leukemia in stage 1 in children sometimes don't even really show a lot of symptoms, and it's the most common childhood cancer. So, for all they knew, she could have, and it was just early diagnosis. So, like, that's why nobody questioned it, because they're like, well, how do I know? It could just be like early. Maybe they caught it early because they're always at the doctor, you know.
I am very much stuck on the feeding tube. I don't think I'm gonna get over that.
It gets worse with the feeding tube too. Just you wait. Just you wait and see how she uses this feeding tube later. While living in Slidell, she used assistance money that she got from Gypsy's, quote, medical conditions and the child support from Rob to make ends meet. While in Slidell, doctors tested Gypsy's muscle tissue and determined that she did not indeed have muscular dystrophy. But Dee Dee did manage to convince them of all the other conditions, as well as a seizure disorder and added sight and hearing difficulties. Meaning, the doctors put her on anti-seizure medication and gave her glasses and a hearing aid.
It wasn't the one that went into the skull, was it? A cochlear
No,
implant?
I don't know. No, it wasn't a cochlear implant. I remember seeing it. It was one of those ones that like sit in the ear.
Okay.
Yeah, so just like a normal hearing aid.
Okay.
The one that like wraps behind the ear and goes into the ear and like makes everything in the environment louder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I remember like it wasn't when she got her mugshot, it wasn't on her. So if cochlear implant you can't just take off. I believe they're pretty much like surgically put in to the cochlea.
Yeah, that's what I was worried about.
No,
I was like,
no.
did they...
They usually only do that for people that are actually deaf. And she wasn't deaf. She could clearly hear stuff. She was just saying that she didn't hear well. So they gave her, like, a hearing aid that they give old people.
I'd ignore my mother, too, if she was just constantly taking me to the doctors.
I know! So in 2005, their apartment was ruined when Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans and the surrounding areas. They were given a place to live in Covington for people with special needs during this time. However, the hurricane gave Dee Dee the excuse that all of Gypsy's medical records were destroyed in the devastation, as well as her social security number and her birth certificate. Online medical records were in their infancy. No one questioned her about Gypsy's age or her conditions when they were asked at the shelter. When talking to a doctor, he stated that they should move to Missouri as the climate could be better for Gypsy's condition. Gypsy would also say later in life that she figured out how her mother would use general anesthetic to numb her gums so that she would drool in front of doctors in order to get her salivary glands taken out. When she says general anesthesia, I'm not really sure. I couldn't find where she got the general anesthesia from, but I'm guessing maybe it was like a numbing gel that you put on the gums for like oral pain. That's what I'm guessing.
That would make sense. When I had issues with my wisdom teeth, I was having to constantly put that on there, and I definitely, like, you definitely do drool a lot more.
Well, and then she probably wouldn't be able to talk even if she did try to talk, which would make them think even more that she's mentally incompetent.
How convenient.
Mm-hmm.
Just how convenient suddenly all these records are gone. No copies, no nothing. I understand that it was extremely devastating and that you can lose a lot of those records. And it's not saying to people who actually needed those records and lost them or anything like that. But how convenient for her to suddenly lose all these medical records and other important documents.
Well, I guess she would have a binder full of every single test that Gypsy ever got and all the diagnoses and stuff and all the letters and some that she probably made herself and all of her medications. And I think that she technically did lose that binder in Katrina. But it's like I'm trying to think of this as a doctor, too, because nowadays we know about these kind of conditions. But back in the 90s, even the late 90s, like, there was no, like, EHR system where you could just, like, request emails of someone's records to be sent or anything like that. You literally had to, like, either fax them, which was not very, like, reliable back in the 90s. I don't believe fax was even really that good in the 90s. It took forever. Or you would have to have the patient pay. Usually it was like 5 cents per page for medical records. And with how many times this woman took this child to the doctor, they probably were just like, well, That's a lot of money that you don't have right now. So I'm going to just go with it. Not thinking that she would be lying for nefarious reasons. But now we know, and it's much easier to get medical records. So I'm not making an excuse for any of these doctors. They should have double checked and called or something. But on one hand, I can kind of get it. Because unless I have suspicions that this lady is lying to me, and I've seen them more than a few times, and she just has weird symptoms that just aren't getting better, I can kind of understand.
I honestly, I'm not really necessarily blaming the doctors. Yeah, they should have double checked, but again, it's the idea we operate off of that a mother would never put her child into those situations unless it was necessary. Is the idea we operate off of.
Yeah.
So
well, and there was never charges put against Dee Dee either for the accused starvation of her own mother, or her own grandmother, or the poisoning of her stepmother. There was never any charges. So she had no record of this previous, even though now we know. But, yeah.
I'm glad I didn't look into this case but I also feel like if I did, I would have just lost all faith in, like, everyone in general.
Humanity.
I would have given up at that point.
Honestly, some of this stuff I didn't even know until I looked it up. I knew a lot, like maybe 90%, but there was still stuff that I learned. So it was still interesting for me. When they moved to Springfield, Missouri, they got a lot of media attention considering everyone believed that Dee Dee was a single mother with a severely sick child who fled the hurricane and were now homeless. So Gypsy won the Child of the Year award by the Olay Foundation that gave rights to feeding tube recipients in 2007. I read that and I was like, how rich is that? She won an award that was created to give rights to feeding tube recipients, yet she didn't even need one. And I'm just like, I knew she got the Child of the Year award, but I didn't know what foundation it was. So when I read that, I was just like, motherfucker! Like,
the unfortunate loss of credibility as well, because,
like, yeah, they had no way of knowing.
Yeah, they had no way of knowing, but it looks terrible on them for giving that, like, an award to a child that, like, it wasn't a necessity, and their mother was lying about it.
Yeah.
Like,
and I believe this is, like, the most televised part of the whole story is when she won this award, she actually, like, sang something to her mother that was, like, their favorite song. And I'd give it to Gypsy. I would not have had the courage to do it, but she could not really sing on pitch that well. It was cute, but really cringe if you watch the original. But it's just, like, you can tell Gypsy feels so awkward. And, like, she probably knew, because she was old enough at this point. She was 16. So, like, I'm sure, like, her birth year was 16, but I'm sure her mom was saying she was younger at this point. But it's like, she probably knew, like, what her mom was up to at this point, or getting some kind of inclination. So, like, that is such an awkward situation, too.
Yeah, because if you say nobody's gonna, like, if you say, oh, my mom's doing all this stuff, nobody's gonna believe you.
Yeah, and then Dee Dee's just gonna say she's mentally incompetent and doesn't know what she's saying. Because everyone believed her. So once their story gained traction after she won the Child of the Year award, Habitat for Humanity actually built them a home on the north side of Springfield. It was painted pink and had a wheelchair ramp. Pink was Gypsy's favorite color. Along with this, they would often have free stays in the Ronald McDonald House for medical appointments, free flights to Kansas to see specialists, free trips to Disney by the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and backstage passes to concerts such as Miranda Lambert, who also gave them money. for Gypsy's medical expenses. And several pictures were taken of Gypsy and Dee Dee with Miranda backstage. The community would also do all that they could to try and help Dee Dee in any way that they could, since Dee Dee couldn't work because taking care of Gypsy was a full-time job. They also received money from celebrities, as I said, churches, and charities from around the area. So this is when the money scheme really starts. And at this point, I think Dee Dee realizes she's too far in to really go back, even if she wanted to.
I mean, I highly doubt she wanted to, because, I mean, free backstage passes, people are handing you money left and right.
Free Disney World.
Yeah, free flights to fuel her disorder.
Because if one specialist doesn't give her the diagnosis she wants, she can just get a free ticket to whatever other specialist she wants to go see.
And whatever specialist she can manipulate, basically.
Essentially, yes. So while people were trying to help, I think unintentionally people were making it worse. But, hindsight is always 20/20.
Oh, yeah.
So Dee Dee actually did have a neurologist who had suspicions of her maltreatment to Gypsy, and they called and reported it to the authorities after she tried convincing this neurologist of her seizures, and he didn't buy it. Caseworkers did go out to the house in 2009 and investigated, but Dee Dee convinced the caseworkers that nothing was wrong, and they left and closed the case. I'm not sure how true. In the act, they showed that Dee Dee drugged her with some benzos, and that made her drowsy, and she couldn't talk. And if she did talk, it was very slow and very slurred. I don't know how true that is, but it wouldn't surprise me if she drugged her so that she couldn't be functional, because the caseworker is supposed to talk to the child in these kinds of cases. And if she did try to talk to Gypsy, Gypsy really wouldn't be able to answer if she was drugged. So, like I said, I didn't really find anything about that. I tried to look up, Gypsy's account of things. But I'm sure she doesn't even really know half of the stuff that happened to her.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm pretty sure most of the medication she was forced to take would have done something to her memory.
Yeah, or made her so foggy that she can't remember correctly.
Yeah.
So while this was all going on, Rod was still sending $1,200 in child support payments, calling Gypsy regularly, and he would send her gifts on holidays and her birthday when he could. However, on Gypsy's 18th birthday, Rod was told by Dee Dee to not tell Gypsy that she was 18 because she believed she was only 14. Rod didn't really question it, considering he believed Dee Dee when he said that Gypsy Rose was slow. He and his second wife also hoped to go visit them in Springfield. However, Dee Dee told everyone in the neighborhood that Gypsy's father was an abusive drug addict and alcoholic that never came to terms with his daughter's illnesses and never sent them money or gifts. She would also tell Gypsy that her father didn't love her and that he was happy with his new family that he abandoned them for. But Dee Dee at this time was also a thief. She would steal things from stores and make Gypsy hide them behind her back in her wheelchair or on the bags on Gypsy's wheelchair, and if people did see her, she would shrug it off and no one would question her because of Gypsy's condition. When Rod found out what she was saying about him, he was pissed.
Rightfully so. I mean, I do not blame him in the slightest for being...
Because, I mean, sure, he probably had a drink every once in a while, but he was no alcoholic. And from what I read, he was trying. And he was sending child support payments. He was always very diligent about that. And I think she only started saying that when Gypsy was 18 because then he didn't have to pay child support payments anymore. So technically, no, he's not sending them money, but then she's telling everyone that Gypsy is 14. So then that makes him look like a bad parent.
But he also has no defense because she's telling him that it's Gypsy believing she's 14 and you can't tell her that she's not, because then it would just shatter her entire reality.
Well, he might not have wanted to make it worse. Like, I can kind of understand a defense for Rod, because if your daughter really is as sick as your ex-wife is claiming that she is, you don't see that child every day. You don't go to appointments with them. Like, again, nobody thinks that a mother is going to lie about their child's condition for money or fame. But, you know, Rod was... Maybe he was a little naive. Maybe he should have gone and checked himself or whatever. But anytime... I believe I read, I just forgot to put it in, anytime he would try to come see them, Dee Dee would say, oh, it's not a good time, we're going to a doctor's appointment, or something like that. Like, she would make some kind of excuse so that Rod could never see Gypsy.
Yeah, I think I do not blame Rod in the slightest here.
Like, yeah. I can understand why he believed her. Yeah, it sucks. He probably should have been like, are you okay? Say 9 if you need help or some shit like that. But, like, how is he supposed to know?
Yeah, you can only start saying those things or prepping those things if you believe the person's already doing it, because if you have no reason to believe the person is doing it, then there's no reason to make those
assumptions,
ideas, or code words or anything. And
yeah, I will say code words are important with kids, though, because then it gives them a way to tell you something's up without telling you something's up. During this time, Dee Dee put on much more of a show. Anytime she went outside with Gypsy, she would take an oxygen tank attached to her wheelchair, her feeding tube supplies, and it was found out that Gypsy was fed a children's liquid diet well into her 20s. Gypsy's hair was regularly shaved off if it grew too long to keep up the appearance of her cancer. And her teeth started to crumble from the anti-seizure medication, and her teeth had to be extracted a little later in life. Out in public, Dee Dee would always hold Gypsy's hand, and if she said anything she wasn't supposed to say, she would squeeze her hand super hard to make her stop talking. In private, her mother started to become emotionally abusive, telling Gypsy that she wished that she had had an abortion, that Gypsy ruined her life, that Gypsy was ruining her life currently because she was trying to tell people that she wasn't sick, and that, quote, Gypsy didn't realize how hard she had to work to keep up what they had built. If Gypsy tried to tell anyone, then Dee Dee would threaten to break her fingers with a hammer, and she would confine her to her bed with handcuffs and a dog leash that she fashioned to tie her to the headboard. If Gypsy was caught walking, her mother would hit her with a coat hanger or an open hand.
Oh, God. You went full, like... Does this normally happen?
In Munchausen?
Yeah.
No. This case is so rare because normally children that suffer under a person that has Munchausen by proxy don't even survive. Normally, they die before they're even of an age where they can speak for themselves. So Gypsy's case is rare in the sense that she lived through it. I mean, a murder had to happen for her to actually survive, but she lived, and she started to become more independent. And what does an abuser do when they start losing control? Abuse more. So it doesn't normally get to this because the children don't normally live this long. Yeah, I actually didn't know that her mother... Like, I knew they put it in the act that her mother used physical abuse, but again, that was a dramatization, and so I wasn't entirely sure. But when I was looking up my research, Gypsy herself told Dr. Phil in a interview while she was in jail that her mother hit her when she tried to walk, or would confine her to her bed for weeks if she did something wrong. And I'm just like, I didn't think that actually happened. But it did. It actually really did happen. And so it made Gypsy even more scared to reach out for help.
Did they do the show after she went on the Dr. Phil thing, or?
So the Dr. Phil thing was rather recent. But I'm pretty sure it came out in trial because her boyfriend who committed the murder knew about all of this and was part of his defense. Like he knew that she was being physically, emotionally, psychologically, and medically abused. So that was a big part of his defense, was he fell in love and he couldn't deal with seeing his loved one that he loved, even though I don't know how much you can love someone from a distance over a computer if you've never really met them in person. But he believed that she was his true love, and he couldn't see her being abused anymore. Gypsy did try to run away once when she found out her mother's lies about her real age. In 2001, Gypsy went to a comic convention and met a guy that she liked. She tried to run away, but her mother found her and then threatened to call the cops and took Gypsy home with her. Gypsy was 19 in 2009, and she tried to run away. She ran to a neighbor's house begging them to take her to the local hospital. She had met a guy online that she liked, and they started a relationship. But he was beaten up by a bunch of local people who knew of Gypsy's condition and said he was taking advantage of her because she was frail and didn't know what she was doing because she was slow. But when Gypsy got to the hospital, she showed her birth certificate to the staff that showed her real legal age. But when her mother showed up, she showed another birth certificate and claimed the one Gypsy had was false, and it was made after Katrina, when all their documents were lost. She said they put her birth date wrong on the one that Gypsy had, and it confused Gypsy because she had to have another one made that had her real birth date, and that's the one that she had in her hand to show hospital staff. The hospital staff let Dee Dee take her home, and Dee Dee made her apologize to all that were present. Her next attempt to escape was in 2011 when she met another guy at a comic convention and ran away to his hotel room. But again, Dee Dee was able to find out where she was, went to the hotel room, told the man she was underage, and threatened to call the police and called him a predator. And then Dee Dee once again took Gypsy home. As punishment for Gypsy's actions, she smashed her computer with a hammer and told her again that next time she tried to run away, it would be her fingers and not the computer. She then tied Gypsy to a bed for 2 weeks. She also withheld food from Gypsy as punishment as well sometimes. Shortly after this incident, Dee Dee told Gypsy that she filed paperwork with the police that would tell them she was mentally incompetent. So if she ran away and they found her, this would lead Gypsy to believe that they thought she was mentally incompetent and that she couldn't go to the police because they simply would not believe her.
I thought you had to go to court for that. I didn't. Well, obviously,
I think she lied. I think she just made it up.
Okay. Because I was going to say, I think you actually have to go to court for that. So if she forged court documents?
No. I'm sure she probably did to show Gypsy. Like, she probably just wrote something up to show Gypsy and convince her that the police would never believe her because they thought she was mentally incompetent. But I could not find anything anywhere that she actually filed anything. Because, again, she would have to be able to prove it. So, no, I don't think she actually did it. I think she just did it to make Gypsy stop trying to run away.
Okay.
But 3 attempts. I mean, the girl tried. She tried her damnedest.
Okay, I'm going to say this out right now, and people can hate me for this. I don't really care. Um, but I do not blame Gypsy at all.
For running
She
away?
tried. Clearly, she tried. Um, and
You don't blame Gypsy for what?
killing her mother.
Oh, yeah. I was actually going to get to that at the end. Like, I think her sentence was completely unfair, granted the circumstances. So, yeah, I mean, the girl tried. She tried real hard. Considering how brainwashed she tried real damn hard. So, despite this, Dee Dee got another computer, and Gypsy would only use the internet at night because of Dee Dee's increased supervision. She made a profile on Christian Mingle in 2012 and matched with Nicholas Godejohn, aged 23, while she was now legally 21. Nick grew up in Big Bend, Wisconsin, and already had a history of mental health disorders and some criminal activity. Nick was found to be watching indecent material and also exposing himself in a McDonald's. He was arrested and charged with indecent exposure. He also was diagnosed with autism and possibly had dissociative identity disorder. Throughout their online relationship, Gypsy would use different wigs for his different alters based on what they liked. And one alter in particular, Nick was actually afraid of. He said this altar was 500 years old and was a vampire that was very sadistic and scary. That this altar would hurt others and also his own body when it took over. To appease this altar, Gypsy would play with sharp knives on camera with a bright red wig on. They continued their online relationship for a couple years, and in 2014, Gypsy confided in her next-door neighbor, Leah, who was 23 at the time, and was afraid that for Gypsy to be in this relationship. She was still under the impression that Gypsy was still underage, because that's what Dee Dee told her. And Leah viewed Gypsy as a little sister, so she cautioned Gypsy to be cautious. But Gypsy ignored her and told her all the things her and Nick had planned. They wanted to elope and picked out names for their future children, and she was trying to find a way to get Nick out to them so that she could meet her mother. Dee Dee eventually found out that Gypsy was using the internet again, but despite destroying several computers and her phone, Gypsy still managed to stay in contact with Nick. I believe she bought a burner and hid it, like a small, like Nokia or something, and texted him. I believe that's how they stayed in contact, was she was able to get something small enough that she could hide it under her mattress or something. Gypsy's dream of meeting Nick in real life came true when she saved enough money from taking from her mother's stash slowly to pay for a ticket on a bus for Nick to come to a movie theater to meet her mom. She had Nick dress up in an outfit like a prince, and she was to dress like a princess so that they could bond and meet over that. However, this meeting did not go as planned, and Dee Dee was very apprehensive of Nick and did not let him get very close to Gypsy. Gypsy ended up going to the bathroom in the middle of the movie, and Nick met her in the bathroom, and they ended up having sex in the bathroom, essentially in the mind of both of them, sealing their relationship. Dee Dee later told Gypsy that she thought that man at the theater was creepy, and although her mother did not approve, she continued her online relationship with Nick, all the while planning on how to kill her mother with the vampire altar named Victor's help.
I knew nothing about the altars. I thought he just. Oh.
No,
Int-
I don't know if Dr. Phil actually asked him about the altars, about his vampire altar, and I think he was confused. I don't think he actually had DID per se. It was never diagnosed, like, ever. He definitely had autism, but I think he was confused because he would call it his alternate personality, not really like another person. He said it was like his alter ego per se. So I think he was just maybe confusing them. I'm not saying he did or did not have DID. He could. DID is a very complex disorder. I have OSDD1B. So I'm just going to say this, I have alters. And I didn't even know until the age of, how old am I, 29? I didn't even know until the age of 28. So he could still be discovering that, for all I know. But in his interview with Dr. Phil, he kind of avoided the question, and kind of just gave a non-answer. So I'm not sure if that's legit, but that's what everything online said. Because that's what he claimed, that he had a 500-year-old alternate personality named Victor, who was the one that took over and killed Dee Dee. Gypsy wouldn't even want to talk to Nick anymore. She would only want to talk to Victor because she wanted to plan how to kill Dee Dee more. In June 2015, Nick returned to Springfield with the plan that he and Gypsy had made to kill her mother. Gypsy waited until her mother fell asleep and then told Nick via text. He came to the house and Gypsy opened the door for him, gave him gloves and a knife. Gypsy later stated that she didn't think that he would actually be able to do it, but he ordered her to go into the bathroom and cover her ears. Nick then went into Dee Dee's room where she was sleeping. He started to stab her, and she did in fact wake up and started screaming for Gypsy to come and save her, and asked Nick who he was. Nick later said in an interview that he told her, "I am your worst nightmare," and then continued to stab her until he knew she was dead. He then went and found Gypsy in the bathroom, took her into her room, had her lick blood from the cut on his finger, which was a big fantasy of his, and then they proceeded to have sex in her bedroom. After this, they took $4,000 that Dee Dee had left in the house and went and hid in a local motel. They then decided to mail the murder weapon to Nick's home in Wisconsin and then got on a bus back to his home where his parents lived. After a few days, Gypsy felt that they had gotten away with it, but she was also worried that no one would find her mother's body. So after a few days had gone by, she had Nick put an update on Dee Dee's Facebook saying, quote, "The bitch is dead," which Gypsy knew would get people's attention as it was very uncharacteristic of her mother to say something like that. It did indeed get the attention of the friends on Facebook, and they all started asking if she was reacting to a recent movie or show that she had seen. Then Gypsy had Nick write a comment on the post saying, "Whoever did it killed her and raped Gypsy." Nick admitted that he had a rape fantasy, and he added that tidbit in himself. This comment immediately worried neighbors, so they started calling Dee Dee on the house phone. When there was no answer, a few went over to the house, but the privacy film on the windows made it impossible to see inside, so they called 911. When the police arrived, they could not enter the home until a warrant was issued for search of the property with probable cause. They did, however, let a neighbor go through a window to check inside. The neighbor did not go very far into the house, but they did notice that Gypsy's wheelchair was still there, and so were her feeding tube supplies and the oxygen tank. But nothing in the house seemed to be disturbed. The neighbors were worried that Gypsy would be in a bad state because she had not taken any of her medical necessities with her and might die without them. If she was taken, then of course her captor would not think to take them either. After several hours, the warrant was issued and police entered, and upon going into the back room where Dee Dee was lying, they found her dead on her bed and in a pool of blood. The neighbors were informed and started a GoFundMe to try and cover the funeral expenses for Dee Dee and maybe even possibly Gypsy if her body was found. Leah, the neighbor that Gypsy confided in, told the police about her secret online boyfriend. This gave police enough reason to subpoena Facebook to track the IP address of the original Facebook post that Nick posted on Gypsy's request. This led them directly to Nick's house, where the local police surrounded the home the next morning and raided the house, finding Nick and Gypsy in his room, and they surrendered. When the neighbors found out that Gypsy was safe and well, they were relieved. But at a conference to the town, the police chief said, "Things are not always as they seem."
I mean, he was not wrong, but that is very much book mysterious guidance person.
I mean, considering he couldn't really say anything without, like, impeding the investigation, I think he nailed it right on the head, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, this is true. This is very true.
Like, I'm sure people
Just
were, like, banging on his door asking for questions, so he's like, oh my god, fine, I'll just say something to make you leave me alone.
And I'm sure they were wondering how she was okay and walking around, all things considered.
Yeah, exactly. So Nick and Gypsy were both held in prison on $1 million bonds. Like, that's a little overkill in my opinion. And news started to come out about how Dee Dee actually treated Gypsy and how for years she had lied about her daughter's health and used physical and psychological abuse to keep Gypsy from speaking out or making her stop abusing her. People were then urged to not donate to the family's GoFundMe until it was known how far this fraud actually went. Both Nick and Gypsy were originally charged with first-degree murder, but as Gypsy's story of long-term child abuse came to the surface, people felt bad for her, and it was called for her to not receive life in prison or the death penalty, as is allowed under Missouri law. Eventually, she was offered a plea bargain that she took for second-degree murder and 10 years in prison. Her attorney actually stated that because she was so malnourished from the abuse, she gained 14 pounds in prison, whereas most of his clients usually lost weight. Gypsy would later tell Dr. Phil that she did miss her mother, as for many years her mother was her only best friend, but that she was also more free in prison than she ever had been under the care of her mother. She has, however, been granted parole to come out of jail in 2023 based on good behavior in prison.
So that's actually coming up. Do they have a specific month or?
It just said, I tried to find a month, but it just said late 2023. I don't know if they're doing that to really protect her because they don't want there to be like paparazzi or people that follow this case to be there. But she really didn't serve that much time. I believe she was sentenced in 2018, and so she'll be out in 2023. So her sentence was cut very well short, but she will be on parole for the rest of her 10 years, but honestly, I don't think she'll have a problem with that.
No, the only thing I think she'd have to worry about is I mean, I would assume that some people sided with Dee Dee and that there should have been other ways to take care of it
You would
and
be
everything.
surprised.
So it could be.
I have not seen many dissenting voices in this case. I've actually seen more people say that it was unfair that she was sent to 10 years in prison versus 10 years in a psychiatric hospital. That's the big debate here, not whether or not Dee Dee deserved it, because I think it's pretty unanimous. And I mean, maybe there is, watch some Dee Dee simp come on to our podcast and be like, you think she deserved it? Yeah, I do. I think she deserved it. I think she deserved to get every single punishment known to man that she did to her daughter and see how she felt about it. Like, I think her death was too merciful. Let's just put it that way. I think people that do this to their children are despicable and deserve nothing but misery for the rest of their life, honestly.
I'm right there with you.
I mean, I'm gonna get a lot of hate for that if there is some frickin' Dee Dee simps, but the debate was, you know, this girl was abused for years. Why is she being put in a prison system for murder of her abuser? It's like making somebody who killed someone who raped them be put in prison. Like, she should have been put in a psychiatric hospital or some kind of, like, secondary home or something to learn how to live, because she literally knew nothing and learned how to read from the Harry Potter books. I doubt the girl even knows how to do math. So, or even pay bills or count money or anything like that.
Well, there's also the fact that now they have to find the right medical, or not the right medical records. None of those records are right,
No, they're
but
all false.
like the right birth certificate and social security card and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, finding her a house or an apartment to live in.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
So I will say that while she was in jail, Gypsy did say that her and her father have started to build a relationship. So I believe when she gets out, she's supposed to go, like when you get out on parole, you have to tell them where you're going, and it usually has to be somebody that's like, can keep tabs on you or whatever, or can help you or something like that. Don't quote me. I've never been on parole. I don't know how it works. But
mhm.
I do believe, like, again, it's kind of all hush hush because I don't think they want people, like, doxing her. But I believe she's going to live with her dad and stepmom, because while the trial was going on, Rod apologized to her, said, I had no idea, I'm so sorry. And Gypsy eventually told Rod all the things that Dee Dee said about him, and he's like, none of that is true. I wanted to be in your life. Like, explaining all the things that he was doing to try and help and try and reach out to her, and it was just all shut down by Dee Dee. So they actually have built a relationship. So I think she's going to live, like, this is just my assumption, but I think she's going to live with her dad until she can really get on her feet.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. And honestly, it makes sense why they're not putting out anything because again, like you said, any groupies or I would be worried about any dissenting voices getting it in their head
And the girl is probably
that they
still
need
so
to take.
fragile. I don't
Yeah.
know if she'd be able to take that kind of malice, to be honest. She needs therapy, not hate. Like,
Mhm.
get this girl some therapy, please. It'll probably be part of her parole requirements is to go seek therapy or something. I'm sure she got some in prison, but I don't know how good the prison system is in Missouri, so I couldn't tell you.
That's a whole nother bucket in itself, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I didn't really look into that. I didn't think we had enough time for me to get into that can of worms, so.
It's probably best not to. That's opening a whole line of fire I don't think we're prepared for.
No, probably not. Not on episode 2. Okay. So, as for Nick, his lawyers were trying to get a lesser charge for him and had his IQ evaluated. And he was evaluated at an 82 on the IQ scale. Sorry, I say my 2 is weird. 82 on the IQ scale. So, and he had his mental state evaluated twice. So, he was officially diagnosed with, like, moderate autism. He originally waived his right to a jury trial, which I'm just going to say, don't ever do that. If you feel that you can get a lesser charge from a jury trial, especially if you're, like, I really hope nobody in this podcast is ever in this situation that Nick Godejohn is in. But if you are, do not give up your right to a jury trial. Like, just don't. Don't do it. It is your right as an American citizen. Don't do it. Just don't. But he originally waived his right to a jury trial, but in June of 2017, he changed his mind. So a trial was set to go November of 2018. The trial included text messages between the couple where several personas were used between the two, and Gypsy was sending explicit and sexy photos of herself with the knife that she eventually gave to Nick to kill her mother with. In these texts, Nick would ask about the layout of Dee Dee's room and her sleeping habits. On the third day of the trial, Gypsy actually took the stand. This was not part of her plea agreement, but she did state that she did indeed give Nick the idea of killing her mother to stop the abuse, but that she did also offer a second idea of getting pregnant by Nick, and then Dee Dee would have to accept them. She even stole baby clothes the same day she stole the knife from Walmart that Nick ended up using and were in the pictures that she sent to him. Nick's defense lawyer used his autism and being love-struck by Gypsy as his prime defense. That he did what he did for the one that he thought was his one and only love. While the prosecution claimed, and also showed with the text messages, that Nick had been planning this murder for a year before it actually happened. After 4 days of trial, it was sent to the jury. They only deliberated for 2 hours and found him guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. And in their jury instructions, they were actually given the option to down the murder charge. They were given the option of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and I think there's a misdemeanor murder charge that was on there. But they were offered other types of murder to charge him with if they felt that first degree was too much. But they went straight for that first degree murder. Prosecution did not ask for the death penalty. So instead, in February of 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder conviction and 25 years for the armed criminal action charge, to be served concurrently. Nick's lawyers are now trying to get a retrial for several reasons. For one, his original lawyer never asked for a change in venue, as the venue was very detrimental for an impartial jury to be found. Second, his own psychologist was not allowed to speak at the trial on his diminished capacity, and only the prosecutor's psychologist was allowed, and obviously gave evidence to support the prosecution. And third, they were arguing that the judge should not have allowed the jury to know that Nick did consider raping Dee Dee before killing her, because he did not actually do it and it did not pertain to the murder charge, and only to slander him. It was also found that his prior lawyer did not bring in witnesses that would bolster the claims that what he did was out of love for Gypsy, and also did not question the jurors enough to know if they could in fact be impartial. Lastly, upon getting the records of Nick from prison, it was found out that he did not understand the situation that he was in when he was arrested, and was more concerned with knowing if Gypsy was okay rather than knowing what his situation was. He was also on suicide watch for quite a while in jail, which was also never brought forward by the previous lawyer. There were also videos that Gypsy sent to Nick of her pretending to stab her mother while her mother was sleeping. These videos were also never shown to the jury. Another video that was never showed Gypsy saying to Nick that he was her slave, and if he didn't obey her, that he would lose time with her, and she believed they were both equally evil, and she wanted to kill and be evil together with Nick. The decision for the motion for the new trial has still not been decided, and will be decided later this fall. So I guess we'll just have to follow and see how it goes. But that's the juicy stuff that I did not know. And there was, in the beginning of their relationship, there was a pretty heavy BDSM dynamic between the two. But Gypsy was the submissive and Nick was supposed to be the dominant. And that was their agreement. But it seemed that it switched later. When Gypsy was really desperate to get out of the situation, she started playing the dom role and making him submit to whatever she wanted. So, knowing all of that, I don't think a jury would have convicted him of first-degree murder. Nick stated to Dr. Phil in his interview that the days that he had with Gypsy were the best days of his life. Days filled with joy and happiness that he would not take back ever, and that he also would not take back killing Dee Dee. He stated that he might do it differently as to try to not get caught, but he would still kill her. He stated that he could not see Gypsy suffer anymore under the abusive hand of her mother, and that he would still kill her as many times as it took to free his Gypsy.
I definitely do not think that either sentencing for Gypsy or Nick were the correct sentencing. You brought up a fair trial, or that's part of the appeal.
Yeah.
I think it's now going to be so difficult to find any sort of unbiased people just because of the act coming out and the other things that have come out around the case and how publicized this case was for a while.
Well, I mean, look at the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, though. Like, I'm sure it was hella hard to find an impartial jury, but they managed to find 11 people that either said they could be impartial or really didn't know anything about either of them. So it might be hard, but I think it's still possible.
There's also an interesting, it brings an interesting light to the BDSM community and how much power or whatever you can give over to somebody.
As a person in the BDSM community, I will say though, uh, the sub normally has most of the power. It's not supposed. The Dom is not supposed to demand power. He is given it because it has been earned. And
Hmm.
there is trust. So I think what they had was not. I think two mentally unstable people coming together trying to solve an issue of an abusive mother was not a good outcome. I don't I think she just used his BDSM fantasy against him, really, in a way that really was not proper. It was just more of a way for her to manipulate him, in my opinion.
Hmm. It's also very interesting, not saying that Gypsy is like Dee Dee, but seeing the parallels between what was done to her and how easy it was to flip to get
Mm-hmm.
out of that situation to use what she had learned from Dee Dee.
Yeah. But when you grow up in that kind of situation, like, you have no option but to learn their ways and be better than them at their ways. So I sympathize with her because that's a lot of therapy that she's gonna have to digest.
Yeah, no, that
Because I'm sure she has regrets. Like, I think she even said to Dr. Phil, like, I regret having Nick kill her, but she's like, I can't take it back now. She's like, and she even said she felt that it was necessary and fair that she spend some time in jail, but the amount of time that they sentenced her to, she felt like was overkill because of the circumstances, and that she personally would have rather spent time in a high security psychiatric prison than a regular prison, which I think
that
is
would have been
fair.
better for both of them.
Honestly, yeah, I think it would have been, because God knows they both need it after that. Because imagine being in a situation where you feel like there's no other solution to saving the person that you feel is your one and true love, but to kill their mother. And you see no other way out for that person. Like, that is devastating. I couldn't imagine thinking that way.
Argumentative, argumentatively speaking, it's a very logical step because we can see the amount of times Gypsy has already run away, how easy it was for her mother
To
to bring
find
her
her.
back.
Yep. Because
So
people,
if they
she
had
would just tell
chosen,
people, "Oh, my daughter got abducted. Did you see anyone? Did you see her with anyone? Did you see her go somewhere?" And they would just buy it. So then she'd always be able to track her down.
yep,
So, like, I get it, but I don't know if the pregnancy option. I didn't know that Gypsy offered that up to him. That might have been a logical way to get out of it. I'm
I
not sure.
understand. If that is true, if that was a part of it, if that was another option, um, I would honestly say that would be the more dangerous option because now Dee Dee would have two other people to manipulate and control and make sick.
Mm. Well, not if
Because
she moved into, not if she got married to him and then moved out. Um,
there's also the fact of you don't know what Dee Dee, even if you could somehow keep Dee Dee away from you personally,
mhm.
it'd be very difficult to keep Dee Dee away from the child, I would think. And that would put the child in such a dangerous position. Unless you could stay with the family or stay closer to the other family, that if need be, the child could go to his parents.
Yeah. She didn't really like Gypsy didn't really elaborate on it in court, I don't think, but that probably was her idea. Get pregnant, get married, go live with Nick's parents and be as far away from Dee Dee as possible. But I don't think Gypsy really understood the gravity of how far Dee Dee was willing to go. Because without Gypsy, she has nothing. So, like, she's essentially made this whole facade, and without Gypsy, everyone's gonna be like, where'd Gypsy go? I thought she was 16. Oh, she got pregnant and ran away. I thought she couldn't get pregnant because she's sick.
That's another thing is how bad all the medications and the feeding tube and everything. How bad did that mess everything up? Would that have endangered the child at all? That's an interesting.
I don't think a feeding tube would be a problem. But honestly, all the medications that she was on, I don't think she'd be able to get pregnant. Because she was on so many. And for all we know, Gypsy might have been on birth control and not even have known it.
Yeah, ooh, that's is there I mean,
Because maybe
could there
she
also
started
be
getting her period and, maybe her mother came up with some excuse. Because I believe when you're on, I'd have to research this, but I believe when you're on chemo, your menstrual cycle stops. So she, in theory, was not supposed to be having menstrual cycles. So she could have had the doctors prescribe some kind of birth control saying, she can't change a pad or a tampon herself, and it's too hard for me to do it, so can we put her on a birth control that stops her menstrual cycle so that she never bled? So I could see
ooh.
that happening.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense actually.
Yeah, and then that would feed into the facade that she's telling everyone that she has leukemia. Because I don't think she ever told doctors that she had leukemia, just neighbors and other people. And, they can't check it because of HIPAA. So what are they supposed to do? Pull her medical records every time she applies for, like, Make-A-Wish? They're just going to believe her. I mean, look at her. I'll probably put pictures in the YouTube video, so anyone listening on the podcast, I'm sorry you miss out. Go find us on YouTube, Housekeepers Podcast. I'll put in pictures and stuff. But yeah, I mean, just looking at Gypsy, you would think, oh my god, like, that girl's sickly. Like, nobody's gonna question that.
Well, okay. So I'm wondering if there are any medications that she could have been on that would have like strictly damaged her reproductive system. So wouldn't even necessarily have to put them on birth control if the if the system doesn't work at all.
I don't know. I'm not gonna lie to you, I did actually try to find. I managed to find all the diagnoses that Dee Dee said she had, but I could not find all the medications. But I remember in an interview, Gypsy said that her mother had a whole cabinet full of all of her medications. Like a cabinet in the kitchen full of medications. So I don't know enough about pharmacology to know. Maybe somebody that's listening knows, but maybe. Um, I don't know if anti-seizure medication can do that. I'm not sure. Because I was actually going to go down the rabbit hole of looking up every single medication that Dee Dee had her on and looking up side effects, etc., etc. But I couldn't find it. It's probably sealed underneath her privacy rights and stuff, which is completely fair. And the only
Mm-hmm.
reason that they would release the diagnoses that Dee Dee said she had is probably because they were false. And so it came in at the trial. So I can understand that, but yeah, all her medications and stuff, some of them I believe she had to be weaned off in jail because they were actually like addictive opioids and benzos and stuff like that. That I do know because she spoke out about that in a interview. But a lot, maybe even a combination of everything she had her on probably could have screwed with something. But I don't, as much as I like that she was trying to come up with ways to get out of the situation that were not murder, I don't know if they would have actually worked. And for all Gypsy knew, her mother could have lost her cool and killed her the next day. You know?
Yeah.
Like, with that kind of situation, it's getting to the point where you're speaking up for yourself and your abuser is just getting worse. That's a scary situation. So, you know, she might not have had very much longer.
Yeah, as terrible as this sounds, I think she made the right decision, and I do not agree. I think they went way too harsh on the sentencing for both of them, just due to circumstance and,
Yeah, pretty much just the circumstance.
and honestly, love will make you do some stupid shit. So if he really was in love with her,
Yeah. Well, he
he would have
probably
burned
never
the
had
entire.
anyone even, like, look at him before. I mean, he's not that
Yeah.
attractive of a guy. But Gypsy was so desperate at that point. I mean, yeah. And she says now she doesn't really have any feelings left for Nick. She feels bad that he's in jail because of her, but she doesn't really, like, she has no, I guess Nick has tried to write her letters and she's never written them back, and yeah, she has no interest in him anymore, which is devastating because, you know, he did this for her and his love is no longer reciprocated. It's like Romeo and Juliet, but the opposite. Like, it's terrible.
I wonder if the guilt and the regret of killing her mother kind of soiled any.
It might have. I think she might have not really survivor's guilt because he wasn't after her, but it might be like a form of that, and she associates all that bad, negative emotion to him. That could be very possible.
Which is still unfair to, well, it's still unfortunate for him because again, he did this for her and
You were gonna say unfair? I think it's totally unfair. I'm just gonna say it. I think everything that happened to Nick is completely unfair. I mean, the only thing that he had before was indecent exposure, and that's probably because he didn't realize that what he was doing is wrong. I mean, like, a normal person would realize, yeah, you can't just, like, whip out your dick in public and watch porn in McDonald's. But, like, it might not have occurred to him, you know?
it's also McDonald's.
I mean, fair. I've seen worse at McDonald's.
I mean, you hear stories about how many people had sex in like McDonald's bathrooms and things like that, so
Oh, man.
I don't know. A lot of what happened to him was unfair, and
I hope he gets this retrial. I really do.
I mean, it would make sense if all this evidence exists, it truly exists, and it's coming to light. It definitely,
like, those videos of Gypsy telling him, like, especially if he was in a love-struck state, her saying, you either do what I say, slave, or you don't get time with me, you don't get to see me, you don't get to talk to me, that's damning. Like, that's pushing a motive onto somebody that they might not really want.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, not really pushing a motive, I guess, but, like, pushing an idea onto somebody that might not really want to do it, but feel like they have to.
It's an obligation all of a sudden.
Yes. It's like, oh God, I'm gonna lose the love of my life if I don't kill her mother. What do I do now? And I feel like, yeah, a murder charge was probably warranted because, you know, he did actually murder someone. And, you know, as much as I want to say murder is never the option, then I think of Hitler. And I'm like, Sometimes it is. As
Would it
much
have
as that's gonna
technically
get
been-
me hated, sometimes it is. But he should have at least gotten, like, I don't know, manslaughter 2 or murder 2 or something. Like, I think murder in the first degree was a little harsh, because that's like a first degree felony. That's intense.
Well, you also have to take in effect of, like, how much planning went into it, and if, like, even if I don't, this is a terrible wording, and I apologize. Even if he believes he has, alters and, like, a dissociative state where he doesn't necessarily know what he's talking about, or, like, it does feel like somebody else is in control, that's also something to take into consideration, just because
it could speak to his state of mind at the time.
yeah, exactly.
If he dissociated and, did it while he was dissociated, I'm not saying he's any less guilty of doing it, but I know personally when I dissociate, I do shit I don't remember. And sometimes it's not even my alters, it's just from my PTSD getting triggered. And I gotta get out of the situation or solve the situation as quickly as possible. And maybe in that moment, the only thing his brain could think of is, oh my god, I started killing this woman. Now I gotta finish it.
Yep.
So,
because if he didn't, they would have both been in trouble.
Worse. Like, honestly, if Dee Dee would have lived through that, she probably would have made his life so much more of a living hell than it already is. Let's just be real.
Mm-hmm. And by precedent, would have made Gypsy's life a hell of a lot worse.
Oh my god.
Because
she probably would have killed Gypsy.
And then he would just sit there knowing he lost the love of his life and completely feel guilty that he never finished the deed.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's literally stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Mm-hmm.
Which is so unfair. But, so that is our case today. Tell us what you guys think below. Do you think they got the sentences they deserved? Do you think they were too harsh? Do you think that they should have been sent to psychiatric hospitals instead of prison? We would really love to know your guys' opinions, and if you have any recommendations for us for cases that Ivy and I can cover. She has different repertoire of knowledge than me, so we would probably choose who got it if we got recommendations, but we would love to hear that too. Anything from you, Ivy?
I feel like, again, we should just exclaim that a lot of this is based off of what we know about the case or what we found out, and just our theories and ideas, and we are not meaning to offend and everything like that, just to cover some bases in regards to that.
No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Other than that, be also interested, we'll probably hear from in the comments, but if you guys would be interested in us getting, like, any social media up that, or an email, or we have an email, don't we?
Yes, I did make an email. It's housekeeperspodcast@gmail.com. It's linked on the YouTube.
Okay, and I'll link it in this next episode on the Spotify, and you should be also able to email your recommendations to us through there, or anything like that, and we will do our best to include them or get back to you. I think this is about how we're gonna do it. Each has a case each week. That might make it easier than trying to fit 2 cases into one episode. Unless you guys like the longer episodes, and then we'd be absolutely willing to cover a few different things.
Yeah. I mean, this was already pretty long, but yeah, I completely agree.
Our next case, though, for anyone keeping up, is about Charles Manson and the Manson family.
Which I don't know a lot about all the details, so this will be interesting for me. Like, I know the basics, but...
And I've been doing my best to study this case since I was 16, 17. I did a speech on this in high school. I'm pretty sure I have a lot of my old sightings saved. So I'm gonna go back to those, see if I can find anything else.
Yeah.
Um, I will say, in another speech I did brings him up again, but it was only one place I was able to find this information. So when that information comes up next week, I'll make sure to disclaim that or whatever. But yeah, our next case is the Manson family, and I'm really excited to go off on it. So
Go off, queen. No, I'm just kidding. All right, guys. Well, as we come to a close, please remember, if you see something, say something. And if you know something, speak proudly and loud about it. And until next time, stay well, my friends.
bye.
Bye.
No, you can't take back the damage you've done.